You know, here's the thing. I've always wanted to make a monster mask, and I've been sculpting for in clay, about a year now, and it's about that time that we dive into making a monster mask. Sculpting it from clay, molding it, casting it, and even painting it. Something I've always wanted to do, so we're gonna get right to it. Let's go. Wendigos have to be, probably in my top 3 favorite monsters of all time. Growing up in Canada, there have always been so many stories, especially around where I live, about Wendigos, out in the brush, in the forest. And growing up near a forest, I always kind of feared that they were lurking in the dark, watching me at night, because my window looked right out into the forest. So at times, it was kind of creepy. Coming up for a design for this dude was kind of difficult. I was thinking of having like a big snout, like I'm doing here, but then that turns out to be terrible. Absolutely hated it. So my next initial thought was thinking, what if the skull of this Wendigo was kind of pushing out from the flesh of, what this person was, or I guess the person used to be. So the skull is pushing out. You got the flesh kind of ripping apart there. And these holes that I'm making in the head there are going to be where the antlers are pushing out. The antlers are going to be big on this dude. Why make things easy when you can make things difficult and learn through your mistakes? So the antlers are going to be big, and they're going to be so big that, they're going to be kind of pushing out through the front of the forehead there. And here I'm just kind of carving away where the mouth is going to be and putting in kind of guides for where the teeth are going to go. Kind of like, when you look at a skull, you see the teeth, but above it, you kind of see where the teeth connect into and then make these kind of ridges above the tooth. Kind of where I'm not sure what you would call it. Maybe the cavity, I think. With those ridges or cavities made, we start to kind of carve in the teeth. Now, a really easy way of doing teeth that I learned from, I think it was Stan Winston video, is you take this little spatula wooden tool here, you kind of push up and you round out the clay to you make the tooth, and kind of where the tooth connects into, as you can see here, I'm kind of pushing up and I'm rounding it out with this kind of cool little spatula. Now, you can use any tool for this as long as it's kind of like a spoon shape, kind of curved. I wanted this Wendigo to have a lot of teeth. Not just like normal teeth, but I wanted them to be kind of janky looking. Teeth above as well. Some are kind of like, what do you call, like snaggle tooths hanging out. And we do the top row, and now we're just doing the bottom row here. And now we got the teeth just roughed in. And we'll come back to this to clean it up later. Here, I didn't like where the eye placement was, or how the eyes are shaped. So I got some reference here of this kind of Wendigo, and I love the look of these kind of doe eyes. So I wanted to mimic those eyes in this sculpt here. So that is what I'm doing here. Just rolling up some fine little tubes of clay and forming kind of the outer ridges of those eyes. Are they called ridges? Yeah, ridges, I think. And smoothing it all out. And on the other side, just trying to make sure everything looks good. The left side, or I guess the right side, wasn't aligned correctly. So I tried my best using some calipers to kind of make sure they're kind of equally distanced apart. And for the most part, I think it turned out fine. I'm still working on my symmetry, but from what I'm looking at, it looks great. Here, I wanted to make the jaw a little bit more protruded, and we'll be adding these little nubs on the end of the chin later on where hair will be growing out of. And now it's just all about refining a little bit and adding in the grotesque, gruesome, what do you call it, gore, where the skull is pushing out and kind of like the cheek flesh is kind of ripping apart. And this is the fun part, because you can get a little wild with the gore. Here I'm just kind of seeing what it might look like with the jaw muscle. I did decide to put in kind of muscle showing, so the skin ripped off, and you can see the underlying muscle of the jaw, or the masseter is what you call it. And here I'm just using that spatula tool again, which, this is probably my favorite tool. It's just a simple wooden tool, but man, you can do so much with this. I absolutely love it. You can cut in, you can round things out, carve, and I'm just trying to make things look, fleshy and gross at this point. On that side, I just wanted to make it look like there's fat there and flesh. Here, just putting in the ears. I wanted the ears to look more animalistic than human, right? If it looked human, it'd look weird. So we kind of went with these kind of doe-like ears, let's just say. With the ears in place, we're just doing some little bit of raking and clean up on the teeth and the jaw here. Taking a little loop tool and trying to scrape away all those little bumps and ridges, cleaning up the teeth, make them look a little bit more pretty, using some custom tools here to scrape away and refine the teeth. For the ears, like I said, they're not human, so I just kind of looked at some reference of doe ears and some human ears, of course, and just tried to make it look a little bit, I don't know, artsy? I don't know if artsy is the word. I guess more animalistic, If you look at human ears, we kind of have this Y shape in them. So I wanted to add a little bit of that to these ears. So you can kind of tell, like, oh, this Wendigo used to be like a person, right? You look at the ears, like, yeah, I could see that. For the nubs, where the antlers are going to go, I did not like them at all. So I kind of heated up with the heat gun, melted down, and smoothed it all out. We're going to add more clay because I didn't like how tiny these antler nubs were. I'm not sure what you call them. I call them nubs. This is where the antlers are going to be placed into. We add more clay. We smooth it all out as best as we can. We do it to both sides. Just using our thumbs and that little spatula tool that I love so much. Taking this rake tool and smoothing it all out. Time to do some detail work on these nubs. I made this tool out of a pin, some epoxy putty, and a pen, which, it works pretty well. So we're just going in there trying to make some lines, some interesting shapes. And then around these nubs, I'm carving out a line so it looks like it's bursting through the skin. Then we roll up some really thin tubes of clay and kind of place it around where I carved so we can kind of build up that flesh, like it kind of almost peeled backwards. And it starts to look actually pretty decent. I kind of like that trick, see? I love how it looks so far. And then we're going to do exactly what we did on that side to the other side. I wanted to gore up the face a little bit more. A fun way to do this is you carve in a line where you want the cut to be. And once that line is cut in, you would carve kind of beside it, but more on an angle. So it kind of looks inflamed, as you can see here. And then you hit it with a sponge to kind of round out those edges. And then you would come in and use your tool to break apart the flesh so you get this kind of like fatty look. You got the flesh and the fat and the skin. And I kind of do that technique on certain parts where the skull is protruding out, just around that edge. And I'm just refining the line around the skull, well, between the skull and the flesh here, so it looks like it's more just popping out. Again, adding in some cuts and some gore using that same technique I did on the other side. You can kind of see it much better in this part. Where this muscle is protruding from, I add in some more detail to represent the flesh. And then around this kind of fleshy area, I build up a ridge so the skin is separated from the ripped flesh, and just gives it a bit more of dynamic look, a little bit more texture. And we kind of do the same thing on the other side here, as you can see. Drawing that line all the way down, and then we round out all those edges just by kind of flicking outwards. Of course, I wanted the skull to have some cracks in it. I can't have the skull looking all, smooth and stuff. No, this is a Wendigo, all right? It's been through some trauma. Oh yes, the the skin texture. So the skin texture, this texture took me a very long time to do. So what I wanted to look like is like kind of like the skin is cracked. So I made all these shapes using a really sharp tool, and then inside these kind of islands, I was trying to figure out, do I want the scales to be kind of more smaller or bigger? I did not like the small scales, so I wiped it out, and we went for these more medium kind of cracks or scales, whatever you want to call it. And I thought it looked a lot better. It took a while to carve all this out. For the skin texture, I used a few things. I used a ball stylus to make the pores. I used a brush right here to kind of soften those pores in the skin detail, as you can see there. And then for the skin detail, I use saran wrap. You put it over, and then you use a metal tool to carve in those lines. The saran wrap helps kind of make those lines softer. And then you take the brush and you dab it all over, and it softens everything up and kind of brings it together. Well, I think anyways. Sculpt is all finished. Now comes the hard part, the molding process. I've only ever tried to mold once, and it failed horribly. The whole learning process anyway, so if it goes well, that's awesome. If it doesn't go well, I'm gonna cry a little bit. We're gonna be doing a 2-part mold, okay? What that means is, let me rotate this. Since this is a full mass, we're gonna figure out where we're gonna split this, all right? Kind of like down the middle. So I'm thinking it's gonna come from up here. We're gonna build a wall, a clay wall, starting from up here, kind of coming into the horns, or the horn stubs, and then kind of wrapping around the ear all the way down. And I think that'll be good because I am worried about the top part here, creating too much of a vacuum. So I think if we split it in half, that should be fine, honestly. We'll build up that clay wall, we'll reinforce it with some like clay little nubs so it doesn't topple over, because plaster, the cement that we're using, can get heavy. First, what we gotta do is we gotta seal it. Now this is oil-based clay. You don't have to seal it, but we're going to seal it anyway. Now, I've watched a lot of tutorials of what to use. What we're gonna be using is Pledge, lemon Pledge. Well, orange, because that's all they had, but orange Pledge or lemon Pledge. So the Pledge will bite into the gypsum as we slather it on there, right? It'll make the molding process easier. Now, if you go into the Monster Maker's website, because what we're using is Monster Clay, you go to their website, Monster Clay Gray, that's what we're using, right? And you come all the way down, it shows you key product features, and at the very bottom, it shows you insider tip. Beat the dreaded clay cleanup post demold by spraying down your sculpt with lemon Pledge or in dust prior to molding. This pledge will bite into the gypsum and release from your sculpture, making it far easier to demold. Allow your sculpture to dry for an hour before making your mold, and it says do not use crystal clear, which is this stuff right here, crystal clear acrylic coating. All the tutorials that I was watching, they were using Krylon crystal clear to seal it, right? Because it makes demolding apparently easier. But it also messes with your clay to where, well, you're gonna have to scrape off that top surface and you can't reuse it pretty much. Let's spray down this sculpt and then we're gonna wait an hour before we start making the mold wall. Hi, Future Metal here. Don't listen to me. Be sure to make the wall first before spraying this, or else it's going to be very difficult to make the wall stick, because I had a really hard time. All you do is you find where you want the seam, and you build up this wall. Make sure it's fairly thick. This is just a guideline right now that I'm building. But you want to find where you want to lay it, and you're going to build it all the way up and over. This was kind of difficult. With those antler nubs, not gonna lie. And we're just kind of finding where it's gonna go. And then once we find out where the seam line's gonna go, we're gonna add more clay onto it. It's gonna be about 2.5 inches, I think. I do think I made it a little small because I did have some issues with the mold, but we'll get into that later. But you wanna make sure it's big enough to where the ears can fit into it. And you wanted to make it tight enough so no plaster leaks through. And you want to put these nubs behind it to reinforce it, or else it's just going to fall over and, well, your mold's just not going to be good. So we got the border all done. Well, almost all done. We just gotta clean this up, make it nice and flat, so when we do pry it off, it'll come off nice and clean, right? And then these little doohickeys that I put all the way around the sculpt are just kind of like little reinforcements. If you don't put these, well then your clay is gonna go. So make sure you add these to the clay wall to make sure it's stable and solid. So now I'm gonna do some cleanup on these edges here, on the borders. Make it nice and flat, and then we're gonna put in some keys. Now, it doesn't have to be pretty, just get those in there. Now you can use like your thumb if you wanted to. You could use kind of like a teaspoon, push it in there when it's pretty warm. And you're just gonna do this all the way around the border here. And there we go, we got our keys, and now it should be ready to start the whole molding process. Alright, for the molding process, we have a bucket of water here that we're going to wash our tools and our hands in. You do not want to wash your tools in the sink, or wash your hands in the sink when they're covered in plaster or ultra-cal or anything like that, because it's going to mess your drains up, and then that's a lot more money. So I have a bucket here to wash all your stuff in, and another thing of water where you can use to just use this to mix with your ultra-cal, so you're not running, to your bathroom or to your sink to refill what you need. And then another mixing bucket is where you're gonna dump the ultra-cal in. I got about maybe an inch and a half of water in there. So when you put in your plaster stuff, it's really gonna expand a little bit. I'm doing this more in smaller batches because last time I tried to do one big batch and did not work out so well, and it was super runny. So we want to do smaller batches, which I think is going to help me. And the first coat is our beauty coat, which is going to capture all that detail. Our second coat is going to be burlap. I just went to Michael's, got a big roll of it, and we're going to cut that up into squares, which then we'll dip into our plaster ultra-cal mix, and we'll place that as our second layer. And then our third layer, we're going to want it to be a little bit thicker, which we're going to put that right on top of burlap, and it's going to make it nice and reinforced. When using ultra-cal or any plaster, you don't want to just dump it in, or else that's just going to activate it right away. You want to sift it in a circular motion. You can use a scoop like I am, or you can just use your hands and let it sift through your fingers. Alright, so you can kind of see You can kind of see how it looks like a wet desert, right? It's almost like cracked earth. So we're gonna let that sit for a sec so it can absorb all the water and everything, and then we're gonna mix it up with our hands. We don't want it too runny, but we want it just enough to where it'll stick, and then we can put it in all that detail there. I'm like going like this and breaking it up, right, with my hand. So we want to get all those little clumps. I'm gonna scrape the sides. I don't think I can feel anymore. Yeah, that's oh, I like that. That's good. So we're gonna wash our hand now in the bucket of water. This layer is really thin. It's called the beauty coat. The beauty coat is what's gonna capture all that detail. And what you can do with the beauty coat, as you see here, is if you have an air compressor, you can blow all that beautiful ultracal into all the detail, or like me, if you have a straw and you don't have an air compressor, just use a straw and blow all that into it. And you just want to put all this all over it, and make sure it gets everywhere. Make sure it gets into all that detail, and you're gonna notice that it's gonna start to thicken up on you as well. So just keep going, keep dumping it on using a brush, and kind of go in an upward motion. Just get it all on there. For the second layer, you want to dip your burlap that you've cut up, and you're going to place it onto the first layer you did. You want to make sure the first layer is not completely dry, or else it's not going to work out too good for you. All right, so you want to make sure it's like a still kind of wet, but not completely solidified. So dip your burlap in, kind of wring it out a bit, push it on there, and make sure there's no bubbles. For the third coat right here, you want to make a thicker batch of your ultracal or plaster. As you can see here, it's almost like mud. You're just gonna slop it right on there. Ultracal likes to be worked in layers, so this is gonna make it really nice and strong, and just kind of work that all over. You're gonna notice that it's gonna start to firm up pretty quickly on you. The last thing you want to do when it starts to firm up is like jiggle it, or else it's just gonna collapse on you. So just keep building it up like I am here with your hands. Make sure you wear gloves. I mean, you don't have to, but it's a messy job, so I always recommend wearing gloves. And you just want to make sure you get it on there. Here I'm using a metal kidney to kind of smooth it all out, right? You can kind of see it gets into almost like a gelatin-like consistency. This is where you don't want to jiggle it, or else it's going to collapse on you. And use that kidney just to smooth it out, just like that. There comes a point where it's not fully cured, but it's still kind of soft. So dip your brush in some water, and you're gonna use this kind of like a rake, and just kind of rake it up. It's gonna knock all those edges down, all those sharp edges. Because if you have sharp edges and this cures, and you don't pay attention, it can cut you. So use this kind of like a rake with the water, and you're gonna notice it's gonna smooth everything down. And then once it starts to get a little bit harder, take your hand and just sand it down. You're going to notice that this part is going to really smooth everything out, and it feels really nice. Dip some burlap in some water, and then you can sand it down a little bit more. Don't sand it too much, just enough to where it feels smooth, so you're not going to cut yourself. Once it's cured and it's done its chemical reaction, it's going to have this matte kind of finish to it. That's when you know you can flip it over, and you can start to dig out all that clay that you used to make that border. This is the fun part. Make sure you don't break the ears off, because I almost did. Once the clay is all cleaned off, take some Vaseline, and you want to smear this all over the ultracal or the plaster, because if you put more on this, well, the plaster, the ultracal is just going to stick to itself. So this is going to help as like a release agent for it, as well as I put in these keys as well to find the center line for myself. You don't have to do this. I wouldn't recommend doing this because this is where I ran into trouble with these keys. It kind of chipped off when I tried to pry it open. So you're gonna see my seam line for this mask is disgusting, but we make it work. We make it work. Don't worry. So you're gonna do exactly the same thing on the front side as you did on the back side. All right. You're gonna start with the beauty coat. Put it on there. Blow all that in there in the detail with the straw, and just slop it on. Do exactly the same thing. It's all done. Now we just have to demold it using a hammer and a flathead screwdriver, or if you got chisels, that works as well. I put in these little clay kind of pry areas with clay, of course, so I'll kind of have a line to work with around the sculpt, and I'm just going to see if that's going to help at all. And if it doesn't, well, this is going to take a while. The pledge that we used earlier, and of course it being oil-based clay, should help it release easier. But I had to leave this for 24 hours because it got really late when we finished it on stream. This might take a little bit because the clay is going to be nice and cold, which is going to make it harder to demold, but might as well just get to it. When the mold is still kind of fresh, you can take a tool and kind of scrape the edges where I'm prying so it's smoother and not so gross looking. But you know, it's the first mold, my first mold, so I'm not too sad about it. I'll learn about that later on. So you take a flathead screwdriver, a hammer, you're gonna start just, you know, hammering into those pry areas if you made those. If you didn't, just try and find the center line. You should be able to see it, and just kind of chip away, hammer it in there, pry out a little bit, and it should start to release slowly on you. Here we get the back piece off, looking great for the most part. And the front piece, well, this took a little while because of all that detail on the front that I did. It kind of just sucked it, and it took a little bit to get off. So this front is not coming off, so I boiled some hot water, put it in the armature to help try and warm that clay up so I can pull it off a little bit easier. All that clay peeled right off. Oh my god. That was a tedious process to get all that clay out. Oh, I should say that when you're cleaning clay out, do not use a metal tool. Use a wooden tool, or else, you know, you'll run the risk of carving into the plaster with a metal tool. Using wood is just safer. Cleaned out all the clay out of the two sides of the molds. Now we got to clean this because there's still some clay kind of stuck in the pores, because, you know, this is like a really porous. So we got to get some isopropyl alcohol, and we're going to use a paintbrush. We're going to kind of try and break down that clay and clean it up, and then use a paper towel to clean that up as well. And then once we're done with that, we're going to have to mix up some more ultracal or plaster, and we're going to have to patch some of the bubbles that have formed. You can like see right in there, the bubble formed and kind of pushed back. A little bubble here. I'm not too worried about this, since this is going to be the entrance to where we put the antlers in. And then bubble in the ears here. I think you can see that one. That's a pretty bad one. And then a little one there. Another one there. So there's still a bit of work to do, but it shouldn't take too long. There's also like a bit of a gap at the top. I think a piece broke off too when we were pulling the mold apart. That I'm going to have to patch as well so the latex doesn't seep through. I'm not sure how that happened. It's fixable. It's good. Finished cleaning the mold, which took a lot longer than I thought. I did a lot of detail, so it took a little bit more extra time. Didn't turn out perfect. Some bits kind of came off from when we cracked it open. I don't know if I didn't put enough Vaseline on it, so some of the plaster got stuck and some of the texture kind of broke off over there. When I put the mold together, I saw that there's light coming in through the seam, and I tried to patch it, but I'm not sure which way is the best way to do that. Patch the bubbles, I just made some like more plaster. It was more like a thick consistency, and all I did was take a toothpick and put it in there, spray it with water so it ran into where the air bubbles formed. I tried to get into the ears as well. Hopefully it looks okay. I mean, it was hard to see inside the ears because it's right in there, so we're going to see how that works. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to fill this up with latex, and I use clay to kind of squish in there so the latex doesn't run out. And it looks like it's all airtight from where I put in the clay. All we can do is try and see what happens, all right? Okay, so we're going to let this sit, do its thing. All right, we'll let the latex sit for about an hour or so. Now we're going to pour the latex back out into the bucket of latex and then just let it drain for about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and we can pull it out. So the latex is cured in the mold, as you can see right there. It's all nice and cured. So with the mold, I'm pretty sure I messed up. This mask is gonna have a wicked seam line. So when you make a mold, it's supposed to be like a pretty thin seam line. You're supposed to be able to see the line a little bit, but with this one, very noticeable. But hey, it's the first mold. I didn't want to waste it, and I wanted to pour the mask, get to learning how to paint these things as well. But I'm pretty sure I know what I did wrong with the mold. So for next time, I'll know what to do better. Let's pull this puppy out, see how it looks. I'm kind of worried, but we'll see. So before you pull this out, what you want to do is you want to put some baby powder in it, or else, the latex will stick to each other if, this side connects with the others or whatever. So you want some baby powder in there, or if you have some excess of the plaster, just like little crumbs and powder, you can also use that, I believe. So we're gonna put some baby powder in here, and then we're gonna pull it. It's looking pretty good. So this latex is actually pretty thick. I want to make sure not to, rip it. So I want to be kind of gentle. Gonna pick a spot here in a sec once I get these seams all done. Start pulling it away. So let's pop it open. Yeah, it got right in there. Oh, it seeped. It seeped all the way around. Oh, shit. Oh, that is a... Yeah, that's a nasty sea mine. Oh my gosh. But, for the most part, I got it. The first monster mask, bro. It looks awesome. Wow. Captured a lot of the detail, too. So, the next process is that we're going to have to clean up the seam line, get some scissors, and I have a Dremel somewhere as well. So we're going to cut that out, Dremel it down to nothing. This, the seam line is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Okay, it's a little bad. It's a little bad. But then once we get that all down, Dremel, I think we're going to hop into the process of painting this thing. From all the tutorials I watched, nobody told me how dirty this part's going to be, because you're going to have bits of latex just flying everywhere. So wear gloves, a mask, goggles. Because I took some latex off my eyeball, and it still kind of hurts. But you want to just use your Dremel and try and chop down that seam line as best as you can. Just don't cut into your own mask. But yeah, just do the best you can. I will be cutting this part out because we'll be sticking the antlers in here anyway, so you won't really see it, and then we're going to glue it in place. And this part, you got to go onto the inside of the mask here. Fill that little hole, I think, with more latex, because it is hollow there. And then we'll let it dry, and then we can trim it. Alright, the patchwork is all done. We got the liquid latex in there, in that seam there, and then we did all the seam. And then patched some areas here, the latex. And so now we're just gotta wait for it to dry, and then we can get that big old piece off there. And we can start to paint, I believe. All right. It's not time to paint yet. What we want to do first is we want to cut everything that we needed to cut. All right. We want to cut the back of the mask so we can fit into it. We want to cut out the eye holes, the ear holes so you can ear, and the nose holes so you can breathe and you don't suffocate yourself to death. Because if you do this after painting, look at me, I'm scared. The painting is just going to look white, right? You're going to be able to see underneath that paint. So you want to make sure you cut your holes out before you do the painting. Here, we're making the antlers before painting. I know, we'll get into the painting, I promise. One thing at a time. Using tin foil, we make a pretty cool antler, or antlers. And then we wrap them in painter's tape so it's a little bit smooth. And then once we wrap all these, we're going to take some foam clay, which is really neat. I've never worked with this stuff before. Foam clay air dries in, I think, 48 hours. It was pretty difficult to work with, but it's pretty neat stuff because when it cures, it becomes lighter than what it was. Use some water as well to smooth it out while it's still pliable. As you can see here, I dipped a sponge in water and smoothed it out. It didn't work too well, but don't worry. Once it cures, you can take some sandpaper and smooth it all out. Well, like what I'm doing here, apparently. Take some sandpaper and you can just smooth it all out, and it's a really cool material. I gotta say, foam clay is really neat. I also made some smaller antler parts that'll be popping out the front, like I said earlier, and we're just using a Dremel to kind of clean them up and make them look kind of gnarly. And then here I'm just making sure it all fits together and looks nice. Finally, I know. Time for the paint part. Here I got some acrylic paints, just from Michael's, normal acrylic. And here is a special sauce. Now this is important when it comes to painting latex masks. You're going to want to mix 1/3 indoor household paint, 1/3 of your liquid latex mask, and then a little bit then well, a little bit less than 1/3 of water. You're gonna mix it all up, and that's gonna help adhere the paint to your mask. Because if you just use acrylic paint, it's gonna chip right off. And then you mix in the acrylic colors, whatever color you want, in with that concoction. As you saw, I used some jars there, and you're gonna want to water it down a little bit if you're gonna use an airbrush. For myself, I went with a really kind of like a cool, like a cool looking kind of paint for the base coat. Because this Wendigo, he's far up north, right? He's in the wintry climates. He's not in the summery climates. No, this dude's gonna be frostbitten a little bit, and you're gonna see that. And we just cover the whole thing. This stuff dries really quickly too, actually, in maybe like 15-20 minutes it dries. I should also say that this is my first time using airbrush and painting a mask, so I'm just trying to go off of what I saw in tutorials and kind of treat this like I'm kind of using ZBrush, using poly paint, which kind of helped. So I made this nice purple as well, sprayed it on the ears, sprayed it kind of all over the mask a little bit. I wanted the purple to kind of pop out a little bit as well. Still have that blue in there. Almost looks like it's like cold blood underneath, you know. Completely purpled out the nubs where the antlers are going to go in. Took a brush and kind of brushed it around. I didn't want this to look all airbrushed, so I'm just kind of smoothing things out. For the bone, I made this kind of bone white or bone yellow. It's like yellow and white. Yeah, yellow and white. I did a couple coats of this because it was pretty thin, and you can still see the purple and the blue popping out. So I just spray this on where the bony parts are going to be, the jaw, the face a little bit, using a heat gun to dry it. Do not let your heat gun, you know, stay too long on one spot because it is latex, it will melt. So you just want to move it around and make sure it dries. Making these bony parts as well, the nubs, a little bit bony-esque. Drying it again. And making sure all the parts are covered in this color. Now we get to the red, right? The gory red, yes. So I mixed in some red. It wasn't quite red enough. It started to turn like a weird purple. So I used some red food coloring, which ends up making this like really nice kind of coagulated blood color. So I just spray this all over where the grossness, right? The gore is going to be. Now, doing this, you're just kind of building up the layers. You're spraying the colors where you want it to be. It's not looking like much right now, but it's going to be brought together when we do the ink wash. That's when it just all comes together, all right? Doesn't look like much now, but trust me, the ink wash really brings it together. So yeah, we're just spraying where we want the blood's going to be. Around the cracks, underneath where the skull's kind of protruding, where I think the blood would be coming out of, you know. And then as well as in the antler nubs. For the teeth, I didn't want to use an airbrush because I was afraid I was going to spray it all over the mask, then I'd have to come back and hit it with the yellow. But we take a little paintbrush, just use the basic white, and we paint the teeth nice color of white. I ended up mixing up some yellow and orange to kind of gunk up the teeth. It's not a clean Wendigo. He's a dirty boy. He's a very dirty boy, as you can see here. Look at him. He's disgusting, and I love him. For the ink wash, this is important. You want 70% isopropyl alcohol and inks. I use Artist Loft inks, or you can use FW inks. Doesn't matter. I got some blue, and then I mixed it with the black. And what you're going to do, mix all that together, put in your airbrush, and you're going to spray down your whole mask. Make sure this ink gets into all the little details or crevices. Okay. Okay, just everywhere. Make sure it gets everywhere. All right. You can see here, making sure this whole mask is coated in this beautiful time lapse that I spent many minutes on, as you can tell. Since this has a lot of detail, I'm making sure this gets into all those cracks on the skin here. So the mask is all sprayed down. Let it sit for a minute or two. Don't let it completely dry. Get a bowl, dump some isopropyl alcohol in there, get a sponge, and you're going to start wiping it off. Now you just want to wipe it off the high peaks of the mask, right? You don't want to go into the valleys and get rid of where I went into all that detail, because that's what makes it pop. As you can see here, you can see all the darkness and all that detail, right? And we're just kind of rubbing off the surface there. You know, getting into the ears, wipe all that out. You want to be a little, you don't want to be too rough. You want to be gentle. It's a gentle process as well. And boom, all those colors is brought together by this beautiful ink wash. To make the teeth shine, I use Liquitex Gloss Medium. It has some stretch to it as well, so you don't have to worry about it chipping off if you're, using this mask a lot, pulling it on and off. But Liquitex Gloss Medium works great on teeth. Now, we're not done yet. We still have the horns, or not the horns, the antlers to do. For the antlers, I kind of wanted to follow the same color scheme as the mask, laying down that yellow for the horns, and then I wanted to put that red, that nice red that we made, kind of on the tips of the horns there, going down about probably halfway as well. And since this is foam, I did try to do an ink wash on these. My mistake, I forgot that foam sucks up color and sucks up ink, so it worked a little bit, but it probably would have worked better if I just used basic acrylic and mixed it with water and then did a rub out, and that probably would have been fine. But as you can see here, I'm spraying on the ink and it's soaking it up. But in the end, it actually turned out pretty good. It made the antlers look like gross and dirty, which plays well into this Wendigo mask that I'm making. I could have left him bald and he still looks amazing, but I was so annoyed with that seam line. So what we're going to do is we're going to hair him. I bought this white kind of nylon hair, as you can see here, and the white hair fits this dude perfectly. So we take some rubber cement because it has flex. We cut the hair that we have into, medium lengths, and we just put the edges on to the mask and we paint upwards with the rubber cement, and it makes, well, the hair stick, as you can see here. As well as I rubber cemented all the antlers in as well, because it has flex. You don't want to use anything that's like super glue, regular glue, because that stuff doesn't have any flex. It's going to pop right out. And for the hair, we just do this. We just keep painting upwards, right? We paint up towards the roots with the hair. And this dude, he's going to look pretty good. And of course, with those nubs on the chin, I want to give him like a nice little beard there. Oh yes, beautiful. And it's all finished. The Wendigo. Look at that detail. Look at the paint job, hairing, painting, the horns, or the antlers, I should say. Through this process, I learned so much. I had a lot of fun doing this, and it makes me just want to do another one. So I want to ask you, what should we do next? What kind of monster mask should we make? Let me know in the comments. Now this is a really tight fitting mask after putting the antlers on and rubber cementing them in place. So it's going to be more of a display piece than, wearing it. You could wear it, but it's just really, really tight. So I know what to do next time. I think we got to build up the sculpture a bit more because latex shrinks. But for my first one, could not be happier. And I'm going to display them right on my wall. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button. Comment on what kind of monster mask you want to see next. And of course, I'll see you in the next spooky video.